This happened 5 years ago. I went out with my friends drinking one night, and I got home after midnight. I had work the next morning, so I went to bed as usual, pretty much as soon as I got home, which was my usual time anyway. I don't know how long I was sleeping for, but I'm definitely aware of one thing. I know for a fact that someone came into my bedroom at some point in the night. "Hey, come on, let's go," a voice said to me. It's so strange to think back on it now, but when I heard that voice, my instant thought was, oh yeah, I gotta go. Whereas I should have probably been thinking, who the hell is this and how the hell did you get in? I remember folding up my blanket and putting it in the corner of the room. I have never done that before. I'm not sure what compelled me to do that. I mean, who does that? It's weird. Then I left the room with the person who came in to get me. It's hard to describe, but I guess it was kind of like a friend coming to pick you up to go somewhere. I have absolutely no memory after I stepped out of my bedroom with this person. I can't even remember what they look like. I vaguely remember being in a car, but that might have been me just trying to make sense of my situation. It might not have happened, but I feel like it could have. After a while, I woke up cold. Really cold. I was in my bed and my first thought was, oh yeah, the blanket's in the corner of the room, isn't it? So I got up in my groggy state, grabbed the blanket, and headed back to my bed, put it over me, and I fell back asleep. In the morning while I was having breakfast, I remembered that I had a strange dream. My father came downstairs to join me at the table. I forgot to mention that this happened while I was still living at home. The first thing he said to me was, "Where did you go last night?" I replied with where I went before the whole blanket in the corner thing happened. I just went out with a friend, drinking nearby. "All right. It was that good you had to go back out later then, huh?" He joked. I asked him what he meant, and he said, "Well, I heard you come through the door and get ready for bed later. I woke up and I heard a car outside idling its engine, and then you left the house. I was thinking you were just heading out again. I heard 2 sets of footsteps. I thought someone was with you." I was so confused. So the guy from my dream last night was real, and I really did leave the house? Somehow I really didn't want to admit that I had gone anywhere to my dad. It was too creepy that I couldn't even admit it to myself. I just kept telling him that I didn't go out a second time. He wouldn't accept this though. He said that I did go out, and he went into more detail. His room is next to my bedroom, by the way, so he would have heard a lot of what happened. He first woke up to the sound of the door opening. He said that he heard someone come in. Then he heard the sound of 2 people walking down the stairs and the sound of the front door closing, followed by the sound of 2 car doors closing from outside. Next came the squeal of tires as a car sped away. He said the car headed up the street, but he didn't know where after that. I really couldn't believe it. I tried calling my friend who I went out to drinks with, but she said she didn't come back to pick me up. If she did, then she would have been drink driving, and I can't see her doing that. I hope that the memory of what happened that night will come back to me. I'm sure the person in the room with me was a male. Maybe I went to the next town over or something. I guess I was right about being in the car that night. What frightens me more is the fact that someone got in and convinced me to go with them somewhere, and I didn't refuse. I mean, I wasn't even that drunk. I've been way drunker in the past, and I have better memories of what happened on those drunk nights than that night. It's scary that someone had that power over me. What's the deal with the blankets, too? I don't know. That night really haunts me. I don't think I'll ever get my answers. It's not clear. It's just not clear.
A few years back, I went to a festival in Hachioji. It was summer and I was with 3 friends. We had a really great night out. We took in the night markets and enjoyed the street food, but it was late and we were all ready to head home. It was a hot and humid night, so we decided to pop into Starbucks. We figured it would be a great way to grab a cold drink and escape the mass of foot traffic heading to the station. From where I sat, I could see the counter clearly. I was chatting with my friends about the festival, and in the intervals in our conversation, I naturally glanced towards the counter as it was right there in front of me. I saw a guy wearing a long jacket that stood there at the counter. He looked like he was waiting for his drink to be prepared. I think he caught my eye because he was wearing a long jacket and we were in the height of summer. I was half listening to my friends but keeping an eye on this guy. It looked as if he was talking to the woman behind the counter preparing the drinks. I thought that they were friends at first, but then I realized that the woman behind the counter was ignoring the man. She just went about her work in silence and apparent ignorance of the man at the counter. I thought that it looked a little weird, and I wondered if he was bothering her or even harassing the staff member, and I just kept watching. I don't know why, but the guy in the jacket suddenly lunged his upper body over the counter towards the woman. He was rummaging around for something, and I could hear the sound of it. I didn't know what the hell he was thinking. It looked like he was searching for something. But the woman behind the counter didn't seem to notice that anything had happened. I watched all of this unfold with an uncomfortable feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something seemed so wrong. And after he rummaged around over the counter, he returned to the spot he stood in before the counter. I watched, and it still seemed like the barista didn't acknowledge his existence. He continued speaking to her, and she continued her work without hearing. I couldn't help but watch. But suddenly, the man in the long jacket turned to face me and looked me square in the eyes. He looked shocked and surprised. You know the look of someone being caught doing something that they shouldn't do? It was like that. In that instant, something happened. Everything around me suddenly stopped. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on TV. There was a clear and audible sound. I don't know how to explain it best, but this is what it sounded like to me. It sounded like ice cubes were dropped into a glass. You know that clanking sound of ice rolling around in a glass? Then as soon as I heard that sound, all the natural diegetic sounds around me returned. And as soon as I heard the sound of ice tumbling into the glass, it was like someone had unpaused my life. I instantly looked towards the counter as it was right in front of me, and the guy in the jacket was gone. I looked at my friends, and they were still talking as if I hadn't just zoned out. I asked my friends if they had just seen what I had seen. Well, I asked them if they had seen someone acting weird by the counter, and they said that they didn't. I don't know what the hell that was, but it remains a mystery to me. I wonder why he was bothering the barista, and I have seen other things like this in my life, but nothing recently. Not since that man noticed me looking at him.
I want to share a story which happened during my childhood. It happened when I was in kindergarten, and I can remember it still well. My grandparents' house was close to my parents' house, and our family used to spend a lot of our time visiting them. There wasn't a whole lot to do at my grandparents' house, so I would often find myself bored. I liked playing outside at that age, so at every chance I had, when we were visiting them, I would head outside. That day I was so bored. I don't remember what my family were talking about inside, but I know I didn't want to stay in to listen to it. I wanted out. When I opened the front door, it was night. I knew that this simply could not be. Our family had gone over in the morning. How the hell was it night out? I was surprised, yet curious. So I stepped out into the darkness. He had something like a screen door, and it was open. I looked out and everything looked completely different. I don't know how to rationally explain it. It was like I was somewhere completely new. Let me try to describe it. It was like some kind of giant factory. There were coarse, rusted pipes running everywhere. The hum of distant and nearby machines was in the air. I wondered if they were working properly. I don't know why, but I was acutely aware of these machines and their capacity to work correctly. I can't explain it. There were so many mechanical sounds, robotic bleeps, and sterile-sounding humming noises. I started to get scared and worried. I made an instinctive choice to turn back, but when I turned back and laid my hand on my grandfather's door handle, something was different. The door looked ancient. It was covered in rust, dust, and encroaching foliage. It looked like the door hadn't been used in hundreds of years. I tried to use the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Panic set in. I was hurriedly trying the handle over and over again, but it wouldn't budge. Then I started pushing, banging, and kicking the door. It wouldn't budge. It didn't move at all. I sat there and faced the miles and miles of machines and broke down and cried, just as I felt as if I was about to give up. The door behind me opened with a terrifying squeak. My grandma walked through the door and she instantly threw her arms around me. I was in floods of tears. There was something so unexplainably disturbing to me about what had just happened that I could not produce no other reaction than tears. As I sat there, wailing and sniffling, I heard people approaching. I didn't want to turn to face the directions of the machines again, but I heard familiar voices. I saw my mum, dad, grandpa, auntie, uncle, and a few police officers walking up my grandparents' driveway towards me. According to my parents, I went outside just before noon, and I didn't come back home, so they went in search of me. But when it got dark out, and I hadn't responded to any of their calls of my name, they called the police and reported me missing. I was found by my grandma crying and wailing at exactly 1 a.m. I was then asked to explain myself in front of my family and the police. I did what I always thought was right and told the truth. I told them that I went outside and I saw nothing but machinery, and I couldn't get back in. No one believed me. My mum scolded me the worst. I cried this time not out of fear, but out of a sense of injustice, I guess. Whenever our families get together during the holiday period, we always get to talking about the old times, and my mum never hesitates to bring this incident up. To this day, I don't have an explanation. I don't quite know what happened that day. It's still a mystery to me.
Nine years ago, on the 23rd of December, I was traveling from Numazu in Shizuoka back to Tokyo. Back in those days, I had a motorbike. It was night, and 2 a.m. was fast approaching. I was heading down south on some narrow and winding roads. I was behind a car, and I had been behind it for a little while. We were now entering forest roads. Again, there were many curves and bends, and the car in front rounded a curve and disappeared right before my eyes. I noticed this because I had been using the car in front's headlights to help guide my way. My bike didn't have the same kind of lamplight as a car, and my lights were quite dark in comparison. It was so abrupt that I stopped to see if there was a side road that the car pulled into, but there wasn't one. It was really weird. Cars don't just disappear into thin air. I got back on my bike and sped off feeling pretty creeped out. And as soon as I was back on my way home, I noticed something strange. I keep going around this corner. I actually said the words out loud. I just kept going around the left corner. I don't know how many times I did it before I started counting. I counted 8 laps of the same corner, and I was seeing the same scenery, the same trees and bushes in the neighboring forest, and I wanted to get out of the woods. It was disturbing. Then suddenly, the road straightened out, and I kept driving, but I felt like I was on the verge of losing my mind. I couldn't possibly fathom what had just happened. Everything I knew about the reality had just been questioned. I saw lights up ahead, the city lights of Atami. I knew that this simply couldn't be. There was no way that I could be this far away from my original route. And my whole body was shaking, and it felt stiff. Just in case you are unaware, Atami is on the other side of the country, and it's on the opposite coast. It's a good 40 minutes away. A police officer flagged me down as I was passing through. I really just wanted to get home. I didn't want to stop at all, but I was forced to. He was an officer. The first thing he said to me was, "How was it?" How the hell did he know what just happened? I wondered. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Either way, I wanted to get the hell out of this town and away from the police officer. I hit the road with full throttle, and if you'd have seen me on the road, you would have seen that my face was likely a frightening shade of pale. But the thing is, I don't think anyone saw me on the road that night. I was so weirded out that I pulled into the car park of a nearby hotel and pressed the buzzer at the front desk. I was in downtown at this point. How long had I been riding? Not nearly enough time to be where I was. It was horrifying. A quick look at my watch told me that it was after 6 a.m. at this point. I panicked, and I wondered if I had somehow passed out or blacked out, but now was not the time to try and rationalize that missing period of time. I needed something stable, something real. I needed to see someone normal. I felt as if I was in a different world, like some kind of plane of non-existence. But as soon as I heard the audible sound of the buzzer, something changed. It was as if the world shifted and latched back onto the normal, that almost boring world we live in, the mundane. There is safety and reassurance in the mundane, and sometimes we collectively don't realize that there is. The ordinary can be incredibly comforting. Take my word for it. I spoke to the owner of the hotel about my experience, and she and her husband both confirmed that this sort of thing isn't something rare. Some people turn up at her place saying that the last thing that they remember is the power went out in their home, and then they were in the area nearby like me. After I got back home and took some time to process everything, I understood that when I opened my GPS map, the route I thought I took wasn't appearing on the map. It was so weird, because I remember going into a convenience store kind of close to the turnoff that I took. And even though it happened 9 years ago, I still don't have an explanation for it.
I want to tell you about something that happened last weekend. Since it was a Friday night and I didn't have work the next day, I decided to head to the convenience store after work to grab some booze and some snacks for a night in. For some reason, I didn't walk my usual way home from the station. I chose to go a different route. I don't know why I did this. Maybe it will make sense later. I had a vague idea of where I was heading, so I thought I wouldn't get lost. Let me explain my usual route home a little here. After I leave the convenience store, I go straight for a while, and then I turn right. But that night, I went straight, and then I turned left. It just felt right to do. I was walking down the street, and I found a corner which turned left. I took that left. The street I turned onto was really weird. It looked like it belonged to a different era. There were wooden houses either side of the street. And even the street poles were ancient looking. They were wooden too. The electrical poles were wooden instead of metal. They had these old style ones. I thought they were obsolete. The street looked like it belonged in the 50s. I kept walking. I didn't see a single house with its lights on. It was night, so I expected to see some light from the houses. It was weird. It made it look like every house on the street had been abandoned. There was no sign of life here. But at least there was streetlight. I kept going as I was curious. I approached a house further down the street, which seemed a little different to the others. It had a large garden. All the shutters were closed on this house. I don't know if it was abandoned or not, because I could see well-maintained trees and bushes in the garden. There were numerous flower pots, large and small. Trees were growing out of them. I looked closer and I realized that they weren't the beginning of trees or bushes. They weren't branches. From a distance you could be forgiven for thinking so, but up close, it was clear that these were hands. They weren't human hands, though. They were mannequin hands. I saw them there in the flower pots, and I felt horrible. The sight of those hands evoked a fear in me. I turned around instantly and headed back towards the convenience store. Something was wrong here. Okay, so you're probably thinking that this experience isn't all that strange, right? Well, I headed out of the convenience store at 8:40, and when I got back there again, it was almost 11 p.m. I know that I'm not wrong about this because I still had the receipt in my pocket. How the hell did 2 hours pass in the time it took me to walk halfway down a street? It really creeped me out. I couldn't get the image of those mannequin fingers growing out of the plant pots out of my mind. Those white fingers grasping towards the full moon in a place that didn't seem real. I didn't feel like having just a little drink after all of that. I wanted to drink as much as possible. I can tell you now that I didn't get to bed sober that night. The next day I woke with a sore head, but with more clarity. I wanted to see that street again, so I walked back to the convenience store to go and find it. I was wondering if it was as creepy in the day as it was at night. I wondered if I would lose time again, if I went down it. I took a watch with me this time. I must have paced up and down every street and alley in the area, and I couldn't find the same street again. I found the point where I turned left, but there was no turning that day. I looked on different map apps. I couldn't find it anywhere. It was like it never existed. To be honest, I'm glad I didn't find it. Those hands in the plant pots were weird enough. Who knows what would have been waiting for me further down the street? I don't think I'll go looking for it. I'm scared of missing time, too.